How do we fall in love? Last week, our parish began doing the Alpha Marriage Program, and it begins with this lovely old British couple with posh, elegant British accents, Nikki and Seela, telling the story of how they first met on a group holiday 40 years ago. And each of them liked the look of each other and felt attracted to one another over the space of the holiday, but each were too nervous to say anything to the other for fear of being rejected. They said it was only on the very last day of the holiday they found themselves together and both spoke openly and then had their first kiss, and 40 years later they've been happily married for a long time. They invited the couples watching the video to reflect on how they fell in love with their spouse. Even for me as an unmarried person, it made me go back and reflect on my very, very limited, awkward experience as a teenager of feeling attracted to someone and nervously kind of saying, "Will you be my girlfriend?" and waiting for an eternity till the answer came yes. There's something about the vulnerability of falling in love with someone and then and the risk of asking them if we can be in a relationship with them, the risk of making the first move perhaps. Well, this is part and parcel of falling in love. Today we celebrate Pentecost and the great coming of the Holy Spirit, which we hear in the Acts of the Apostles. And this experience of the Apostles, I think, is actually something like falling in love. The disciples experienced something which was really hard to put into words. We often think of there being tongues of fire and a rushing wind, but that's not literal. What we hear described in the Acts of the Apostles today is there is something like a rushing wind, something like tongues of fire, because it's describing an experience which is ultimately beyond words. That first experience of the Holy Spirit, which was so powerful, I think is maybe a parallel to us of what that experience of falling in love is like. That first word or touch or kiss that can seem so electrifying. But there are more parallels beyond that. We often speak as Christians about the experience of being baptized in the Holy Spirit, although it's not always a term we use commonly, and yet that's a phrase used in all four Gospels. John the Baptist speaks of himself as the one who will baptize people with water, but he says, "For the one who is coming," meaning Jesus, "he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit." But in fact, Jesus never speaks explicitly of doing this himself. What we hear then is at Jesus' final address to the disciples at his ascension, which we heard last week, taking place at the beginning of the Acts of the Apostles, Jesus says, "Very soon you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit," obviously indicating the experience of Pentecost. And so this experience of baptism of the Spirit, it happened to the disciples, but also something can happen to us. I want to unpack what that might be like for us, because it's this sense of this very overwhelming, very particular first encounter with the Holy Spirit. We can have many encounters with the Holy Spirit throughout our lives, and I hope we all will and we all do. But there's something about that first moment where we have that felt, concrete experience of the Spirit that I think has no better analogy than that of falling in love or a first kiss. Something which just is so wonderful and overwhelming and life-changing. This is what the experience of the Spirit is meant to be for us, indeed is for us. We often speak of baptism, of course, our baptism which is sacramental, and we believe in the sacrament of baptism and confirmation we are in fact given the Holy Spirit, because we can't really receive anything of Jesus or God the Father without the Spirit being involved. But this baptism of the Spirit is something distinct. It is something different. And it's something I want to invite you to reflect on whether you've actually experienced yourself or whether you might be open to receiving. Baptism of the Spirit comes when we actually really surrender ourselves to Jesus, when we desire the Holy Spirit to come and work in our lives. And this can happen really at any age. It can happen, in fact, before our own sacramental baptism if we're adults, but more like it happens for us, most of us who are baptized as children. It happens much, much later on at a turning point, a deeper moment of our faith life. One wonderful Catholic writer, Sherry Weddell, talks about the processes of the stages or the thresholds of us becoming real disciples of Jesus. And she says that the Spirit manifests in us when we make that surrender to Jesus. When we allow ourselves to say, "Jesus, I truly want you to be Lord of my life." And if we're baptized as babies and confirmed as children, This is something that is separate. It's something later in life, which may happen for me when I was 15 as a teenager, but could happen in our teenage years, our 20s, or in fact any time in life. It could be when we are much, much older, that we get to a point of letting go, of surrendering control of our lives, of saying, Jesus, I want you, I love you, I give my autonomy to you, I give my control to you. St. Ignatius had a wonderful prayer, which is called the Suscipe prayer, which is, take, Lord, receive, Lord, all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, my will, all I have and are is yours. I return it to you. Do with it as you will, which quite beautifully captures that sense of surrender. And when we have that surrender, then it may well be at that moment that the Holy Spirit will well up within us, because our defenses are down. We've let go of our controls and our blocks. We are willing to look stupid, even in front of others, if that should be what God decides. So we may in fact manifest it when in charismatic circles we see people either praying out in tongues, babbling in a strange tongue in the way that St. Paul describes as ecstatic tongues, or we may even find ourselves falling over. So overwhelmed are we that we fall over, and it's called resting in the Spirit. But these things don't have to happen. These are not baptism in the Spirit. But baptism in the Spirit is something which is an inner felt experience of the Spirit. And more likely you'll be accompanied by perhaps tears, that's tears of joy, or a smile which you can't wipe off your face, and laughter that comes with that. That's a far more common, manifestation of the Spirit working in us. And when the Spirit does indeed come to us in this powerful, wonderful way, in the way the disciples could only describe as being like fire and like wind, it is powerful, it is strong, and then God takes a deeper and greater control of our lives. This Pentecost, I invite you to reflect whether you have ever experienced that kind of concrete manifestation of being baptized in the Spirit, or whether you are open to that. If you're watching this video before 2 o'clock on Sunday and Pentecost Sunday, I invite you to come and join us on Sunday afternoon at St. Gerard's for our Wild Goose Prayer Afternoon, which will be a time where we do allow ourselves to invite the Spirit in, and allows us to be baptized in the Spirit if we've not experienced before, or to renew that if we have. And if not, if you're watching this sometime later, this may be something you do quietly in the privacy of your own room someday, some night. But pray that prayer of complete surrender, complete handing over your life to Jesus and inviting Him to take control. And at that point, His Spirit will do new and wonderful things in you. Happy Pentecost.